Hey everyone, it's Synth Designer back again with another Sound Design Basics video. Today I wanted to show you 3 ways how you can use reverb and delay. Now all of these methods can be used, it's just a matter of personal preference and seeing how it fits your song. Before I get into this video, I wanted to say if you're new here, check out my previous videos on Sound Design Basics. It's basically a course that takes you through the fundamentals of sound design. Everything from basic wavetables to how to use automation, and even gives you ideas on how to create kind of basic sounds to get you started. And if you enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing as well. And of course, leave your comments below if you want to see anything specific. I'm always happy to do any videos at all on sound design. Now let's get into it. So to start, I have this basic chord pattern here, and I'm going to play it for you, and then we're going to get into the first method on reverb and delay. So it's a really kind of chill type of sound. I love making chill wave and synthwave music. So this pattern here is very kind of reminiscent of chill wave and the sounds you would hear from there. So let's open up Serum and get into it. The first way to use reverb and delay is actually just using the stock effects that you have in your synthesizer. Now Serum is actually pretty good when it comes to its effects. A lot of people knock the effects on Serum, but I actually find them pretty decent. So let's open up the effects rack here. Now let's play this sound without the reverb and delay and see how that sounds. Sorry, it's clipping a little bit. Let me turn that down. So as you can see, it's a really kind of dry sound here. It's very heavily filtered. That's just meant to kind of convey that chill sound. And then let's turn the reverb and delay on here. Gives it a lot more space, right? And what do we see here with the reverb and delay? Now the delay is actually pretty good in Serum. You can actually change the delay time here and amount on individual channels. So the left and right can actually be different. So as you can see here, I have the right on the 1/8 and then the left on the 1/4. And that actually kind of gives it a kind of a bouncy type of sound where one is actually giving more delay than the other. And you don't actually find that on every synthesizer. So it depends kind of on the synthesizer that you have and what kind of parameters you can set with it, right? So that's one of the pros and cons that you would find with using delay or reverb with your actual synthesizer. See what kind of parameters you can change. Now, it's still pretty basic. Like you have the normal and the ping pong mode. So if I were to change it onto the ping pong, and let's just check out how that sounds. So it makes a bit of a difference, but because I have this offset already, it doesn't make a huge difference. If it was kind of the same left and right, then you would hear it more of a ping pong mode. Now, I don't want to get into every single parameter. The point of this video is really to show you what kind of sounds you can create within each type of delay and reverb setting, right? Going to the reverb here, you can see that it has kind of a basic low cut, high cut, then it has the size decay, and then just the spin and the spin depth. But it does have the plate and hall option. So the hall is going to give you a much bigger sound in comparison to the plate, right? But why don't we A/B them and see how that sounds? I actually like the plate a little bit more. And I think the plate delay or the plate reverb is actually a better option for this one, for this type of sound at least. So the important thing here to kind of recognize is that if you're using the effects rack right on your synthesizer, you're going to be limited by the parameters that are actually on your synth. So this might be okay when it comes to a decent synthesizer like Serum with decent effects. And there's a lot of great effects racks on different synthesizers, but you may be limited in different ones. For example, some of the stock FL Studio synthesizers like GMS, I really don't like their effects rack very much. I don't find that it works out too great, but it is an option, and it actually does provide kind of a unique character to your own sounds, and it's a unique synthesizer character, right? You're not going to get a third-party source here that's going to be impacting the sound, and every single synthesizer is going to have its effects rack set up in a certain way to kind of complement the sounds that it produces. And I oftentimes use the native effects rack for synthesizers that I like. That's because I can just dial in the sound right there. I don't have to worry about it too much elsewhere. But if I want kind of something a little bit more unique or with more options, then I'll go elsewhere, right? That's probably the biggest con when it comes to the native effects rack within your synthesizer, is that the options will often be pretty limited. So the next type of reverb and delay is just to use it directly on your mix track. So right now you can see I have my synthesizer on mixer number 6, and then I have Fruity Reverb and Delay. Now I'm only going to use the stock plugins because I don't want to muddle things up too much, and I'll talk about how to use them here. So let's just start with the reverb. So you have the dry and the wet here. And those are the two you have to focus on right now. I'm not going to go through every parameter. I just kind of wanted to show you how to set this up. What the wet does is it is essentially the output signal, and in a way it's the amount of reverb that gets put onto the dry signal, right? So you have the actual signal, so we can just bypass this for now. I turned off the effects from Serum, and we're just going to run with the reverb and delay on the mixer track. So let's just play this without the delay and reverb. Right? So it's completely dry. There is no reverb. Now let's just turn this on and see how it sounds. This is just with reverb. And if I were to turn the wet signal down, it's completely off, right? So this is essentially the amount of reverb that's blended in. So right now, all you're hearing here is just the reverb. Since the dry is off, there is no input of the actual signal that you're hearing. Oops, sorry for the clipping. And now the dry is essentially back to 100%, and then the wet here is at 120. So you could really push the wet signal. The wet is essentially how much of the reverb signal you want to hear. So it kind of depends on your taste and how much you want to push it. And obviously here you have all these other parameters. I'm not going to get into everything here, but the point is really to show you how you can affect things just by putting the effect directly on your mixer track. Now there are certain limitations here. The great thing is, obviously Fruity Reverb is a little bit limited, but it has a lot more control than you did on just your effects through your synthesizer. And that's one of the benefits, right? The effects from the synthesizer are meant to be kind of basic. Oftentimes you'll find yourself using the effects just to kind of build the sound, but not necessarily to finalize it. So you'll have just the effects to kind of show you what you want to hear if you were to have kind of a more dedicated reverb or delay plugin as onto your mixer, right? That's not to say you can't use the actual effects from the synthesizer, but sometimes you don't want to be limited by whatever it has. And so the delay will be the same here. As you can see, Fruity Delay actually has a lot of great settings here, so why don't we A/B and see how we can dial in the sound properly. Just turn up the reverb a little bit more. So that's too much delay time. And right now it's actually clipping because I have the dry signal coming in and it is too powerful essentially. So I'll have to turn it down on Serum. And so you can see you can have a lot more control over it here. Changing the level, for example, the feedback level. And again, look at all these parameters here, comparison to Serum's default delay, right? Delay, very simple here, whereas Fruity Delay has tons of different options. And that is just the basic kind of pro to having a dedicated delay or reverb. Now, one thing I should mention is be careful when you're stacking reverbs and delays. There is no rule on necessarily having just one delay and reverb, but when you do that, it can get really muddled, especially because you might be having different delay and reverb types, and each one of those is going to be kind of layered onto each other, right? So don't be doing too much layering of reverbs and delays unless you really specifically know what to do. Meaning, I would just stick with one reverb and one delay per synthesizer or whatever sound you have, right? So don't have a reverb and delay on your Serum, for example, and then Fruity Delay and reverb on the mixer track. It will just really muddle things up and it will completely destroy your mix. So then the final way here is kind of one of the most popular ways to use it these days. I'm not going to say that this is the only way of doing things, but it is certainly one of the best ways to do things right now. And that's through kind of a parallel sidechain. Now, I'll show you how it works in FL Studio, but you can do this in any DAW, basically. So in FL Studio, what you'll want to do here is create a separate dedicated mixer track just to your reverb and delay. I'll show you how to do it with reverb, but this can be done with reverb on one track and then delay on another. So let's just get into it here. Let's select Fruity Reverb and then have it on its own direct track. What you'll want to do is turn the dry signal all the way down and then turn the wet signal all the way up. Then you'll want to dial in these parameters however you want them, depending on your mix. But the most important thing is dry signal will be at 0 because the dry signal will be completely on its own dedicated channel, right? And then the wet signal will be 100%. And what we're going to do is slowly blend this in. So the important thing here is select this track here, so your synthesizer or whatever sound you have, then you will right click and you say sidechain to this track. What that does is create essentially a sidechain from your synthesizer to the reverb. And then let's rename this reverb synth. And now we have our own dedicated reverb just for this synthesizer. And then what we have to do in FL Studio is create a send to that track. So we have a dedicated send plugin here in FL Studio. It is called Fruity Send. And after I find it in a minute, there we go. And then we just route it essentially to reverb synth. Now we have a synth routed to another track. and also to the master track. So that is why we took out the dry signal, because otherwise we would have two dry signals going into the master, and that would kind of add just volume, which we don't need. We have the volume of the dry signal here, and then we want the volume of just the wet signal here, right? So I hope you're kind of following along what that means. And so let's just start blending this in and see how it sounds. As you can see, all of a sudden the volume is coming in. So you have full control here. You have just the dry signal here and just the wet signal here. And we could turn it all the way up if you really wanted to. And we don't have that doubling effect, because if I had the dry on, let's just turn this up. So essentially I have two of the same dry signal, and that's not what we want. We just want one dry signal and one wet signal. And that's just a beautiful way of kind of having full control over how much of the reverb that you want, right? And the same thing can be done with the delay. So let's get Fruity Delay on here, set it about the same parameters we had before. Once again, turn down the dry, and then turn this down. Once again, we're gonna have to do the same thing. Take synthesizer here. Actually, let's rename this first. Delay, synth. Take our mixer track here, sidechain to this track, and then we have to create another send. So select, go to Fruity Send right here, and then send to Delay Synth. So let's blend both of these in and see how it sounds. First, let's start with the dry signal. Actually, let's turn down the feedback level because I don't want it too high. So let's just start with the dry signal only. Turn up to the reverb however we want. Now let's blend in the delay. There we go. So that's just another unique way of creating reverb and delay onto your synth. So we had the pros and cons here of each of them. As you saw, the effects from your synthesizer are going to be limited. The reverb and delay directly on your mixer track, there's going to be limitations as well. There's a lot more options here, but it's a little bit more difficult to dial in the wet and the dry knob there. I would say it's one of the least ideal ways of doing things, just because you have the option of doing it through a dedicated send. Now, it will take a little bit more time. It's a little bit, I would say, a little bit more messy because you have to create dedicated sends. If you're an organized person, that won't be a problem, obviously, but it's pretty much one of the best ways to do things, and you'll find that you'll be able to dial in your sounds a lot more accurately that way. So hopefully you'll have a better understanding of how kind of the wet and dry knobs work and how they can have an impact on the actual synth as well as the actual delay or reverb. Down the line, I can probably do another video on actual parameters within reverbs and delays, but I really wanted to show you kind of how to dial in these sounds without necessarily knowing each and every single minute detail of them. As you can see, I really didn't change much when it came to the actual delay and reverb, other than the time for the delay. What I wanted to do is you can just blast it all the way to the top when it comes to the wet signal here, and then you can dial it in very slowly, and that's one of the great things about having a dedicated send. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.